His most recent book is called Who Will Defend Europe? And I must say, I'm moved that this book is dedicated, as Keir says, to the Ukrainian people who at immense cost have formed the front line for the defense of Europe. So we thank all the Ukrainian defenders for what they are doing today to keep Russia's threat at bay for all of us here in London. So Arseniy, I would like to start with, because of the title of our session, how would you define what is a win for Ukraine in this war?
Well, first, Arisia, I'm very grateful that you made it possible to address the Chatham House. And frankly speaking, I am very lucky, because you did the same with President Zelensky. And I am sitting near Sir Keir. We have two Sir Keirs, Keir and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So I feel like being practically not far from my president.
Right.
So how would I define it? The very survival of the Ukrainian state is the victory for Ukraine.
Okay.
NATO membership is the victory for Ukraine. EU membership is the victory for Ukraine. And ironclad security guarantees, and that's the reason why I mentioned NATO membership, because I don't buy any kind of another special purpose vehicles for the security guarantees. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. These I would assess as and last but not least, to bring Russia to justice. Justice must be served. And designated war criminal Putin and an entire Putin's regime have to be held accountable. So this is the set of measures and my vision of Ukraine's victory.
You mentioned, just to develop a little bit, Ukraine's survival, but surely some people say survival isn't enough. Do you believe that if Ukraine integrates with European Union and NATO, it will be able to actually, build back better, flourish economically, bring back its people, because it has lost quite a lot. It has taken a heavy cost of this invasion?
Well, that's exactly the reason why I indicated both EU and NATO membership. Survival means a flourishing and vibrant Ukraine.
Okay.
Survival means security for the Ukrainian people. Survival means prosperity for the Ukrainian people and for the Ukrainian economy. So it is a comprehensive definition. But the reason why I mentioned survival, because war criminal Putin, he wants to annihilate Ukraine. So for him, this is a genocidal war. Have you seen him yesterday delivering some kind of stupid stuff in Valdai? So for the second time, it is not for the second. For a number of times, Putin has mentioned Nazi criminals as heroes. I don't know whether you remember when he said that Goebbels was quite a smart guy. It is in the YouTube. And you know what yesterday he said? That it is due to Poland, Nazi regime started the Second World War because Polish people refused to cede Gdansk corridor. He said it publicly. So the guy is completely obsessed with, it's not even imperial, but with the fascist and Nazi policy against the free world. And he is very open about that. He always speaks openly about everything. Even in 2007 at this notorious Munich security conference. You remember when he said that it was the biggest disaster of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And my beloved Western friends were just deaf. They were thinking that he is kidding, In the end, we have what we have.
So what you are saying is reminding us that Putin's goals go beyond Ukraine. Clearly, he wants to annihilate Ukraine, but his ideological and imperialist agenda stretches beyond the borders of Ukraine, threatens other neighboring countries and those that are already in NATO and European Union. That's why it's good to bring in Keir now, because what we hear often, that it will be up to Ukraine to decide the parameters of this victory and how it wants to end the war. But surely, if this war takes place in Europe, we in the West also have some vested interest in the outcome. Could you say what kind of outcome you would like to see for Europe in this war that would secure Europe rather than make it more vulnerable?
Well, since we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, if you'll forgive me a minor digression, it's probably a good time to mention how Chatham House is going to be addressing that problem, because we have a new leader of a combined program, bringing together the remnants of the Russia-Eurasia program, including the Forum, and the Europe program, into a Europe and Russia program with a new leader. We should welcome Mr. Grégoire Rousse, who has just arrived in this building and will be perfectly placed to treat that question as a priority, because it is the outcome of the war on Ukraine that will define the future of Europe for decades. Now, we are told by Bronwyn Maddox, our director, Mr. Rousse does speak Russian, which is natural enough since it will be essential for the job he is going to do. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting him and to hearing his vision for how Chatham House can bring together those two elements: Europe, including Ukraine, Northern Asia, including Russia, and foster those two vital interlinked goals of promoting Europe's defense and Russia's defeat. Which brings me back to the question. It's one of those questions which has had the same answer since February 2022 or before, but it keeps getting asked because the answer is not one that our decision makers in Europe and North America can understand the implications of and act on. It has always been the case that the scale and extent of Russia's strategic setback, whatever it suffers in Ukraine, will determine the scale and extent of Europe's breathing space before Russia moves again. And that covers a huge range of possible outcomes. There is the survival of Ukraine, which in itself is a victory when Russia is seeking so hard to destroy it, at one extreme, however you define it, whether it is the full engagement of Ukraine with all of these structures to which it has the right to belong, or simply continuing to resist, to be resilient, to defy Russia. Any of those is a victory. At the other extreme, there are options that are probably by now off the table. Now, a lot of people in this room have heard already the story of how a senior diplomat in London years ago, briefed people from this organization at the end of his tour on what it would take to turn Russia into a country that was no longer intent on invading and destroying its neighbors. He had a policy prescription. He said, what you need to do, referring to the Western allies, what you need to do is do to Russia what you did to Germany and Japan. Wage total war on it, bomb it flat, invade it, occupy it for a period not just of decades but of generations, completely rewrite its constitution, overhaul its educational system, re-educate the public, and then, after several generations, you will have a country that can live at peace with its neighbors. Now that is not going to happen. So the best case outcome is somewhere else along that spectrum. But the worst case outcome in the long term is for there to be something that appears like a victory in the terms of end of hostilities, which allows European leaders to convince themselves that the problem has gone away. If there is a ceasefire without conditions, if there is an end to the war which cements Russian gains in place, if the major combat operations cease, and then Europe thinks we can take our foot off the throttle for rearmament, for building our resilience, for preparing ourselves for the next time Russia seeks to attack a neighbor, then we will be in even deeper trouble than we were before. So that question of what exactly the Ukrainian victory looks like is absolutely crucial for Europe's future defense and security, as it always has been.
Thank you very much for kind of outlining it. And here I would like to move to the area that has been preoccupying a lot of people hopeful that there could be a settlement, especially when Trump came to office this year. He was very resolute that he wants to end this war, that he'll somehow have this relationship with Putin that will stop the killing of people. For one thing, genuinely, he wanted to stop the killing. It's not going according to the plan. And actually, I see the relations between the Alaska summit when Putin was brought out the cold, and now the escalation and disruption of major airports, the drones and the cyber attacks within NATO territory. But if we take for a moment this assumption that that the only way this war will end is through the negotiated settlement with Russia, right? Surely it cannot be defeated, some people say. So Ukraine will have to sit at the table, will have to negotiate with whoever is in the Kremlin. Arseniy, you have spent a lot of time, with Minsk agreements that Ukraine had about 200 rounds after the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the war in Donbass. Do you believe there could be any pressure that could be put on Putin to actually negotiate in honest way with Ukraine?
Well, the first time I met Putin face to face, it was in 2005. He has changed, definitely, but the thing is that this is a very cunning, foxy and sneaky KGB operative. And we have to realize, our Western friends have to realize, it is too late to realize. And he plays with the people, he easily scrutinizes them, he reads the psychology of the counterparts, so he's good at that. That's what he was actually studied in the KGB institutions. You mentioned negotiations. Look, give me a break. There is no negotiations at all. They've pretended. It was a sham negotiations. They sent a no-name to Istanbul, if I'm not mistaken, to pretend that they are acting in a good faith. And there was only one person aimed at getting this kind of signal, and it was President Trump. So Putin's idea was very clear, to drag his feet, to play all of us, and mainly President Trump, and to do his best in order to avoid the next round of sanctions and in order to avoid escalations with the new US administration. So that's the first point. The second one, you mentioned that there are a number of pundits and folks who say that, look, this war could be settled at the negotiating table via the diplomatic solution. I don't buy it at all. This war won't be settled by diplomacy. And here is the reason why. We are completely irreconcilable. He wants to kill us, and we want to live. Tell me, where could we find the common ground? Maybe we should find some kind of extraordinary diplomat who will provide us this kind of common ground. But I am not sure that he exists on this earth. So, going back to the question you've raised, there is only one way to make Ukraine to win. And with all due respect, you said that it's up to Ukraine to decide the terms and conditions of the peace.
That's what we hear often.
Yeah, and I like this. I like this kind of statement, and I really admire. But here is the thing. If we are let alone to decide, Putin will get what he wants. And he wants an entire Ukraine. And he is ready to cut the deal. He is ready to get so-called peace at any price for Ukraine, but at the best price for him, with the capitulation of Ukraine. So we desperately need your support. I mean, the support of the Western world. And that's what he was playing for. He expected that the US administration will turn its back on Ukraine and that there will be a huge fragility within the European Union, which we actually witness right now, okay? Undecisiveness, never-ending talk shops. And in this way, this kind of the war of attrition will deliver the best result for Putin, which is Ukraine and the restoration of the Soviet Union. And last but not least, you've just mentioned Putin, I mean Russia, that it is Russia that is waging the war. Let me provide you with the bigger scope. It is not Russia. This is an international conflict. China is providing a lifeline to Russia. China is supporting this war. China is an accomplice in this war. China is a key partner of North Korea that deployed its troops against Ukraine and provides an ammo in this war against Ukraine. China is an ally to Iran. So, given that, look, China, Russia, and another pariahs, they present a totalitarian regime that is fighting against the democracy and the free world. So this is the definition of this conflict. It is not just Russo-Ukrainian war. It is bigger.
Yes, thanks for bringing that perspective. And now, if Kira, I ask you the same question, but more building on Arseniy's response, how can we change the calculus on Putin in this war through hard power if it's not through negotiations and appealing to the costs that he is already encountering? I remember I was told at the beginning of the war by one of the East European foreign ministers that he thought if Russians would lose 500,000 men in Ukraine, they would end the war. But I said, surely Russians are counting losses more in tanks and in equipment than in men. And we are not inflicting high enough damage to Russia. So what it is that could either deny Russia capability to wage the war or change its calculus?
Well, sadly, in spite of all the evidence, the idea that this war can be brought to an end through negotiations refuses to die. I lost count of the number of times I was doing media interviews over a period of extended months asking me to comment on the peace talks, quote unquote, the negotiations. And when I said, what negotiations? They are not happening. There is no point of contact. There is no discussion that is actually going to lead to any kind of outcome that you have in mind. Everybody was terribly confused because the presentation of what Russia was doing was not just for the audience of Trump. It also was very natural for global media to engage in this process and pretend that something was happening. But it was well before the end of 2022 that the then Ukrainian commander, Valery Zaluzhny, identified that the center of gravity for confronting Russia was, in fact, bringing it home to ordinary Russians, that the war was not something that was being waged on their behalf a long way away for exterminating Ukrainians that we can all cheer and it won't affect us, but would in fact affect Ukrainian society and
Russian society.
Excuse me, Russian society. And the calculus behind that is that the only way to induce the Russian leadership to end the war is to present a challenge which is a threat to that grip on power of Vladimir Putin. Now, this is something which we see Ukraine developing on a daily basis, bringing home to ordinary Russians that this affects them, for example, by making sure that they cannot buy petrol to fuel their cars. But it's also
that is already happening to a degree.
Exactly. It's also something which Ukraine's foremost Western backers were trying hard to oppose under the previous US administration, for example, that had reached the conclusion, partly as a result of how Russia was presenting this war, reached the conclusion that it was more dangerous to allow Russia to be defeated than for a neighbor of Russia to be destroyed. And that is still a mental block that it is hard for some backers of Ukraine to overcome. Is it possible to defeat Russia? Of course it is. Will people do it? That's a whole other question. Whether there is the will across Europe to actually recognize what is at stake and take steps accordingly is a whole other question. Now, we know what Russia is concerned about. Let's look at what's been happening in Denmark over the course of this month. Denmark identifies what it is that deters Russia, long-range precision strike, to hold at risk things that matter to Russia. Russia has hysterics as a result. Starts the nuclear threats, and then a few days later, drones mysteriously appear over Copenhagen Airport. We know this matters to them because not only of the concepts of deterrence and war termination that they have written about at enormous length over the previous decade, but also how they react when it happens. So it can be done. The question is, will it?
Yeah, and just to bring in the question from James Nixie, the former director of Russia and Eurasia, he says, good morning to all of you, gentlemen and ladies. And the question is a bit hypothetical, and he understands that, you know, it's a speculative alternative history, but what might have been, what would our world look like today if Ukraine were provided all the necessary military kit, the Taurus tank-stopping landmines, air protection, possibly the Sky Shield that there has been a discussion a lot. Could we be bringing Ukrainian victory closer?
Well, let's take it back even further than that. Because what if in October, November of 2021, when Western powers were fully aware what Russia was planning, they had decided, instead of deciding that there was nothing they could do about it, to actually do something.
Yes.
If there had been the kind of support for Ukraine that was designed to deter Russia from attacking, as opposed to the endless diplomatic processions to Moscow to try to cajole President Putin out of doing something that he had his mind set on by saying, we know exactly what you're going to do, but we're not actually going to do anything to stop you, then we could possibly have had the start of the process, the long process of turning Russia into a country that is deterred and has had boundaries set for its behavior. And that is the only way we are, over the long term, going to remove the only hard security threat to the European continent. But instead, that process did not start, and so Russia continues the pattern of its post-colonial wars, bringing it what looks like success on Russian terms. Until that changes, this will never stop, and until Russia itself changes, we are always going to have this problem.
And that actually, I want to bring Arseniy, because I would even go further to October 2021, but to a spring of 2014, when Russians invaded Crimea in the first place. And we do know now from open archives and sources that Americans were openly dissuading Ukrainians from mounting resistance, and the price that Russia paid for that great transgression of international law was non-existent, to be honest. So, I mean, Arseniy, what do you think at that time, back from 2014 to 2021, was stopping Western partners of Ukraine, if you can call them like that, to actually see that if Ukraine is not armed, you remember the whole discussion about whether Ukraine shouldn't be given lethal weapons. We are far away from that, but it was the case. Could Ukraine be given lethal weapons to defend itself? This was a legitimate question all over the media. What did you hear then from Ukraine, from Berlin, from Paris, from London, and how did that lead to where we are today?
You know, I admire all these ifs and buts, but here is the thing: we don't have the time machine.
Yeah.
So we can draw the lessons out of what has happened a decade ago. Because let me remind you that this war has been going on for 11 years, but not for 3.5 years. Putin illegally invaded Crimea in 2014. And there was no political will on the side of our allies to provide Ukraine either with a lethal weapon or to give a real membership perspective in NATO for Ukraine. I was the Speaker of the House in 2008, and I hosted the then President of the United States in Kiev, who did everything in order to get this map, but in the end, in Bucharest, we were refused to get map for Ukraine.
Membership action plan for NATO.
Yeah, membership action plan for NATO. It's a kind of entrance to NATO. What happened in the end? Putin invaded Georgia and moved to Crimea and to the east of Ukraine. So let me put it this way. We are well aware this inconsistency and a lack of guts and balls drive us to the situation where we are right now. Right now, we are at an inflection point. Mm-hmm. The price is skyrocketing if we waste the time and if we drag our feet. So here is the lesson. If the West decides, I mean the West, the US administration, the European Union, and the UK, and I really commend the United Kingdom. Yesterday I met your former Chief of Defense, Admiral Radakin. Your decision to provide Storm Shadow missiles and Challenger tanks to Ukraine was a sea change. It was a game changer in the decision-making process of the entire West. So here is the thing, what is needed? So first, we need an additional security supplemental for Ukraine from the US administration and from the European Union. Second, we need to get a real financial support. The budget gap is around $170 billion in the forthcoming 3 years. Mm-hmm. Fourth, we urgently need to increase the military production capacities, both in the European Union and in Ukraine. We make cheaper, better, and quicker, I mean in Ukraine. So please give us cash in order to provide Ukrainian military with the necessary ammo. Fourth, we need urgently to confiscate Russian assets because you guys are facing tremendous financial problems. And we have the source, which is completely in line with the international law. And I can elaborate on this, why it is in line with the international law to make Russia accountable and to confiscate Russian assets. And last but not least, China and India, those who support Russia and those who help Russia to circumvent sanctions. So we need to hold the dialogue with India and to press on China. This is the menu I've got out of these 11 years of indecisiveness, okay, that we faced. In terms of, Kir, with all due respect, you said about Russia and Russia's defeat. I know that you worked in Moscow, so you have the reading on Moscow. The problem is I was born in the Soviet Union. I have the reading of Moscovites too. So we have to realize that Russia is not the normal state since 2014, because we are still applying all these patterns of the institution, flag, state anthem, democracy, elected government, Duma. Look, from the time Putin blatantly violated an international law and illegally annexed Crimea, even starting with Georgia, it became a mafia-style state, chaired by KGB operatives. So, as of now, this state is completely on the war footing. He isn't eager to accomplish this war because in case if he get any kind of ceasefire or peace deal with Ukraine, this will be a clear-cut threat to him personally. Yeah. That's the way dictators live. And we have to realize this. And we still look at Russia as, look, it is the country, it is a P5 member, they created the UN, that it's not no longer. So we have to look at Russia as a warmonger, as a mafia state, which has nothing to do with the real, I mean, normal country, with the normal institutions. Because Putin always used these kind of misreadings. And this is the best way how to play us. If we look, if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So it's a duck, okay?
Yeah, I think this is important to have a clarity of judgment to call the spade, like you're basically saying, because part of the narrative power of Russia, which some people are already aware of, previously it wasn't so much even aware of, is in playing with our perception of reality and trying to convince us that perhaps their reading or their version of reality is more correct. And I think this is the danger where Trump is, in a way, where he was validating Putin's version of events, Putin's interpretation of Russian invasion of Ukraine, that, you know, I'm sure will come up in questions. But Kir, would you like to add more things to Arseny's list of what do you want to see, or what should we be watching to know that things are moving in the right directions for Ukraine, or perhaps being warned of that things may deteriorate in the future, near future?
I'd like to actually respond to that, not quite with a laundry list, but instead with an underlying principle that I still think we need to apply in a lot of capitals in Europe and in Canada and around the world. Because let's not forget that although this is a global conflict, it is not just in Europe and North America that there are democracies that stand for the rules-based international order and want to arrest the slide into that global conflict that we're seeing. We regularly interact with colleagues from countries like Japan, Australia, North Korea, South Korea, looking for...
They did it. You're right.
Looking for ways in which these countries can come together to protect their shared interests, and then realizing with a certain amount of bemusement that there is limited engagement with Europe for understanding the problem and then doing something about it. But I think that in itself is a symptom of the problem that I'm coming on to, which is overcoming the mental capture of past ideas of how Europe works. The mental capture of this picture of Russia that has been so successfully sold despite being so different from reality. The idea, in particular, that Russia is too powerful, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be confronted, and that it is impossible to defeat or deter Russia, which is an idea that is still deeply rooted in a lot of the conversations we have about possible futures for confronting Russia, because it has been built up over so many decades. And it doesn't matter how much evidence you bring from past performance, not only of the current leadership, but of the country through decades and centuries, it is still deeply, deeply embedded. So it is a case of changing not just minds, but mindsets, changing assumptions about, first of all, the scale and nature of the challenge and how bad it will be if Europe and like-minded friends around the world do not respond. And secondly, that Europe has agency, that it is possible to insert European countries into a conversation about their future in a manner that is relevant, instead of them sitting by helplessly and talking about coalitions of the willing, but willing being different from able and being different from capable of stepping in before the problem is resolved rather than after. All of these things are just symptoms of that mental paralysis, that mental capture that has dogged Western responses to Russian aggression over the course of decades. And the trick, I think, is getting over that before it is too late.
Yeah, I think one of the realizations inside Ukraine, if you go and talk to people, is that there's a clear understanding that Ukraine has opened a window of opportunity to create a different future, both for Ukraine and for Russia, for the same matter, if Russia is defeated in this war in Ukraine. And the West is too timid to, grasp it and to exploit it and to work with Ukraine, not just as a, at arm's length, but as a true ally in order to reshape what we all want, how we coexist on the European continent. That this is the continent of the smallest size and the biggest diversity, whereas Russia is the big landmass with no diversity at all. So there are all kinds of conceptual conflicts entrenched already in that existence. But I think what also, I'm sure, Arseniy, you would agree, there's a lot of anger in Ukraine that we are wasting time, that we are doing everything that we said impossible at the beginning too late. And this drip feeding of Ukraine's battlefield capability actually turns war in Russia in favor of creating it as a war of attrition, which they think so far they can win. But I'll open now the floor to questions from the audience. I see already lots of hands, so let's bring on the lights. Let's please introduce yourself, and I'll take 2-3 questions. Try to be brief, because as you can see, there's a lot to come. Please, ladies in the first.
Thea Tutberidze, King's College London, War Studies Department. First of all, thank you so much. It's a fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, in the West, we don't have sometimes clear understanding what this war is about. I would like to point few things from the discussion. I remember long ago when the war started, full-scale war, I asked questions, one of the panelists here, about Russia's defeat, and answer was, no, we don't want to defeat Russia. However, history teaches us, without clear defeat, Russia can't be changed. And if we see when it's happened, when Russia more or less tried to democratize and modernize, it was when, for example, in Paris, 1956, we assigned.
We can just
okay.
brief it, because we will.
Okay. My point is, I think it's a time now to talk about what actually Ukraine's win means and what actually security means for Europe in long term. Yeah. Because without Russia's political and not only military, but political defeat, we would not have any peace in long term in the future in Europe. Yeah. Because Russia is not only the country state who can deal with it. It is imperialistic nations.
I think we well taken the point.
So do you think in the future we can see different new countries inside the Russian Federation? Because we know there are more than 28, 30 different nations occupied historically by Russia. Do you consider this as a defeat in the future?
Very good question.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's take a bit more. Yeah, here, gentleman in the third row, please, over there. Yeah, no, the gentleman next to you. Sorry, I just take a bit. Yeah.
He's taller.
Yeah, tall. Yeah.
My name is Jordan Bauman. I'm from the University of Waterloo, and I'm a governor there. I'd just like to discuss like the nuclear problem. I don't think I've heard much discussion about that. How does that impact this? You talk about Russia being defeatable. The argument I hear, at least back in Canada, what about the nuclear bombs?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, very good. Wait, and here, the ladies in the first row, please.
Thank you. Thanks. Latika Burke from the Nightly Australia. I just want to pick up your point on this being an international war and China's involvement. What does that mean for a global response? And actually, doesn't that hamper Ukraine's efforts? Your own government is not that forthright when it comes to China compared to, say, Russia. And actually, the involvement of China in this means other countries who may understand the threat of Russia are more reluctant to get involved if it means China, given their own trading relationships. Thank you.
Well, excellent. The big diversity of questions. So what may happen inside Russia with the de-imperialization of its own proper territory, nuclear, whether it stands on the way, and China? Maybe we'll start with, I don't know, Keir?
Sure. I'll try to keep this super brief, although there's a lot to talk about, and especially in the first two questions. Taya, thank you for agreeing violently with us. The fragmentation idea, Russia will break up if it's defeated, and the nuclear idea, Russia will lob nukes if it's defeated, actually have something in common. It is a myth that has been very successfully sold to the world by Russia, because there are different constituencies that link those two arguments together, and they've been an incredibly powerful tool for Russia, deterring anybody from getting in Russia's way. The idea that, that Russia now replicates the circumstances of 1991, and if you do cause Russia to suffer a strategic setback, it'll break up into mini statelets or warring parties, all of whom have nuclear weapons, and it's a disaster, is not based on fact, because none of the circumstances that applied then pertain. But it's very satisfactory to people who want to argue you can't defeat Russia because it's too dangerous, or if you want to tell Russians the outside world is conspiring to destroy and fragment us, and therefore we need to fight this war even harder. And so it's been sold to different constituencies, and it's self-perpetuating. On the nuclear side, Jordan, the reason I didn't mention it is because it's not relevant, which surprises a lot of people, just as it surprised you.
There were some questions related to that online.
Could talk about this forever. Let me, instead of spending the remaining 22 minutes on that topic, which I very easily could, point you to a Chatham House publication from March 2023 called Russian Nuclear Intimidation and How It Shapes Western Policy. And if you still have questions after reading that, do please ping me.
Okay. Arseniy?
You're so smart, not like we politicians. So I fully share your take. So
next time you'll go first, so you don't have such an easy time here.
Yeah. So here is the thing. I don't have crystal ball what's going to happen to Russia. But I know for sure that the only chance to change Russia is to make Ukraine win, period. If Ukraine wins, this would bring dramatic changes in Russia. This, not a chance.
You think it will trigger change?
I strongly believe that this will definitely change Russia. In what direction, that's another issue, okay? Yeah. But this will bring real changes in Russia. In terms of nukes, here is the thing. I fully share your take. Putin is bluffing. But there is one problem. These lunatics, they have nukes. And if you have nukes, you have so-called button. And if you have this so-called button, there is a minor chance that this bunch of idiots can press the button. The good thing is that China is doing everything to tie his hands. It's not in the interest of China. The same goes with the Americans. And my message to you, I mean to the United Kingdom, and a similar message to France, folks, you are the superpowers. You just underestimate yourself. You have military, cash, resources, economy, and nukes. So why the hell we are scared of Putin? So to put it in a nutshell, yes, he has nukes, but I believe he is bluffing. We have always to be vigilant, careful, but he is bluffing. And that's the very thing that he was playing with the US administration. Just reaching out to the White House under Biden administration and under Trump administration with this nuclear cyber rattling. And that's the reason why the previous administration dragged its feet, but at least delivered support to Ukraine. And I hope that administration will do at least something, because we are still getting the support from the US, but from the previous appropriation package passed by the previous House. And in terms of China, look, I am not an expert in China. I never comment on the stuff I don't understand. But what I do really understand is that China wants to create a new global order. And it is so obvious for me. It is as plain as the day. Look, they have 1.4 billion people. They have nukes, they have army, they have cash. They've been humiliated by the Western-led order, but in the last 2 decades, they made a tremendous progress due to this Western-led order. So that's the reason why I don't buy these kind of statements, negative statements about the Western-led order. So the thing is that, can we as Ukraine handle China's issue? No, we can't. We don't have leverage. But can the EU and the US make it? Absolutely. If you guys present one united front, and if you either negotiate or press on China together, you have a vast majority of different tools.
Yeah, I'll take a few questions from here. Ben and then Dom. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Arissa. Ben Hall from the Financial Times. A lot of the discussion so far has been on what the West and Ukraine's allies need to do to make the war winnable. But I have a question for Mr. Yatsenyuk. What does Ukraine need to do, and particularly on the issue of military leadership, political leadership, to make the war winnable? Thanks.
Thank you. And here, I'll give it to Dom. And then over there, please, in the front row. Yeah.
Thank you. Dominic Nichols from The Telegraph. Donald Trump can't stand President Zelensky partly because he didn't come up with or invent some dirt on Hunter Biden. How much of an impediment is President Zelensky now to a better relationship with Donald Trump?
And here, the last.
By a private member of Chatham House. You correctly said that Putin is never hiding his plans. He's very open about his plans. He says he will do it, he does it. What about his plans of this incursion in Europe? Cyber attacks, drones. What's his ultimate objective of this plan? What is his plan? What does he want? And how far can the West wait before responding? And what respond would mean without triggering the Third World War?
Yeah. Okay, very good. So we'll start with Ukraine domestic. Very good question. If Ukraine has an agency, it is fighting. It has also a to-do list. What is it inside Ukraine?
This time, could you
No,
switch this
you start. No.
He's doing better. Okay, here is the thing. I do understand what are you asking about. You're asking about the domestic political cuisine in Ukraine. Am I right, folks? Or
Mobilization.
Correct. So
economy.
Let me put it this way. I will start with my president. Okay, we are frenemies with my president. But I support him as he is the commander-in-chief. And we have to rally around the flag. Ukraine's democracy is not flawless. Far from that. The same goes with the British democracy. And we are under the martial law. And I've got the latest polls. Just before my trip, I asked Razumkov Center to conduct these polls. Could you imagine that the majority of Ukrainians still believe that Ukraine is a vibrant democracy? Yes, the numbers went slightly down. But we managed to maintain around 65% of those who strongly believe that the Ukraine is a democracy. And more than 80% believe that Ukraine will be the vibrant democracy after the war. So what is needed? We need a very strong political unity in Ukraine. And we have to maintain this political unity. And I wish my president and the government to do their best in order to get everyone on board in this fight against Russia. So we are not allowed to have any kind of fissures or being at loggerheads inside Ukraine. This is the very thing that Russians were always playing with. And I do remember this in 2014, 15, and 16. And this was one of the reasons why, for the first time in Ukraine's history, I was the first prime minister who resigned voluntarily. One can say that I'm an idiot, okay, maybe. but for the sake of the country. So it is important to maintain this kind of political stability. The second one, it's about the morale of Ukrainian people. Once again, under the latest polls, 74% of Ukrainians still believe in an unconditional military victory over Russia. You know, unconditional military victory over Russia. So this gives me some kind of very positive sentiment about an overall morale, both among Ukrainians and in the Ukrainian military. But I want to be open with you and fair. We are tired, sir, and we are exhausted. We are not broken, but that's not an easy thing. Being at the state of war for 11 years and being under never-ending barrages of missiles for 3.5 years. And it affects even psyche, you know. The third issue, what is needed? We need we need to underpin Ukraine's economy. We can't do it without you. Just no way. Ukraine is to spend around 60% of its budget for the military expenditures for the next year. And this year we expect around 50%. 50% of everything we are spending in Ukraine goes from the either grants or loans from our Western partners. So political and social stability are needed. And good governance, okay, which is very important. Strong and good governance. Professionals running the country. We need to have guts and to stay resilient and to be on a very high, I would say, on the strong side of the real morale. Because if we are getting into any kind of gloomy sentiments, this is another way how to defeat Ukraine. And that's Putin knows very well as a KGB operative. Zelensky and Trump. You are well aware about this dressing down in the White House. Okay? I don't want to go back to what has happened. I wish it would never happen. And frankly, I don't want to comment who is to blame. Okay? But the thing is that my president did everything to get along with President Trump. And your prime minister, your advisor to your prime minister, president of France, they participated in this kind of peacekeeping operation.
Mm-hmm. Mediation.
It sounds better, mediation.
There was an open war.
And the reason why I'm telling you this, because look, it was obvious there were different ideas in the Oval over how to prosecute, over how to work with Ukraine, whether to turn its back on Ukraine and to wash its hands, or to be engaged. And the first case scenario was more, I would say, viable rather than the second one. As of now, we have at least verbal U-turn of the United States president. But this verbal U-turn have to be underpinned by actions. That's what I expect to see. And incursion in the EU.
Yeah, maybe we'll give Kier the chance to...
No, I have to... No,
okay.
With all due respect. So, you asked about the incursion. There were a number of aims that Putin followed. The first one is to test Article 4, Article 5, to test military protocols of the European Union. But the main idea he had is to send the signal to every single nation of the European Union. I am ready to send fighter jets, drones, and I am ready to fight against you, unless you abandon Ukraine. My message to you, if you abandon Ukraine, he's going to send everything, fighter jets, tanks, and his military, to your sovereign soil.
Kier?
Just briefly, please forgive me, but the way you phrased the question is a perfect example of the result of the kind of mental capture that I refer to. It's not just you. Our policymakers also have been asking, if we confront Russia, does that not risk World War III? Mm-hmm. It's the wrong way round. It is through not confronting Russia,
yes,
not setting boundaries, that we have arrived in the position of intense vulnerability where we are now, where it turns out that despite decades, 1 decade, of warnings that airports are vulnerable to hostile UAV operations, European airports don't have countermeasures. Despite years of rearmament in Poland, trying to learn the lessons from the war that is happening next door, there's still not an integrated air and missile defense system ready to cope with drones. Despite the cyber attacks, the arson, the sabotage across Europe that has been going on not since the start of the war, but for much longer, for decades, there's no response from European capitals that actually appears to make a difference, except in very single isolated circumstances. All of that has its roots in this idea that Russia somehow is a force of nature, something that you have to live with, as opposed to run by people whose decision-making can be influenced.
Yeah. And actually, that I want to bring in Moldova, where I think there's a reason to celebrate something that Moldova resolutely countered Russia interference and exposed that it's not that Russia is so strong and powerful, it's because previously they had the free passage through electoral systems, through political corruption, through energy, and if you counter that, you actually can defend your country. So that is the good news of this week in Moldova. But let's take a few more questions. A gentleman there, and then I've seen a hand, yeah, the lady here. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Human. I'm a PhD researcher on financial crime with focus on Russia, China, and Iran. There are indications that some European and post-Soviet states continue to provide financial channels enabling Russia to evade sanctions. How should Ukraine and its real partners respond to what many see as hypocrisy with the international coalition? And I want to say Slava Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The lady here. Yeah, in the second row, please. Yeah, I'm sorry. I cannot take all questions. It's good to see such a good interest. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Asia Bakum. I am a former BBC journalist and also with Global Diplomatic Forum. I have a question about specifically Trump was overheard saying that Putin wanted to make a deal with him. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what that deal is? But also, is Trump, do you all believe that Trump is going about trade and tariffs the right way because he's taking power from China and repositioning the U.S. so that it's not maybe even influencing other countries to not trade with China the same way and not be afraid of their military power? And is there anything that you regret not doing, any action that you regret not taking when you were Prime Minister?
Good question. We'll take one more and then I think we'll be wrapping up. Ooh, maybe over there, I wasn't paying much attention to the corner, sorry.
Thank you. Rohudin Vonsavich, Associate Professor, University College London. What are your views on the changes to the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU? And how do you think the EU is faring in bringing in Ukraine into the single market prior to its official accession to the European Union, and how it's strengthening Ukraine's economic resilience?
So big economic bloc, secondary sanction evasion, what could be done, tariffs, whether this is the way to curtail Chinese power, and EU and DCFTA. There were a couple of questions. One here says, would you agree that EU integration process is a significant motivation for the government and citizens of Ukraine and one of the components of Ukraine's victory? You mentioned it at the beginning. And then maybe we'll finish, both of you, on the what kind of deal could they be made? Arseniy, economy.
So let me start with the sanctions. First, Russians are spewing and spreading this narrative that sanctions are useless. It's not true. One expected that as sanctions is to be imposed, Russia's economy will collapse. It's an exaggeration. Look at North Korea, Iran, even Cuba. But the thing is that in the long run, Russia right now is paying the price and will pay the price. But the thing is, the biggest, I would say, problem that we are facing right now is that Russia still has an ability to finance its war chest with the hydrocarbons. Look at the numbers. In the last 5 years, Russia's budget revenues from the hydrocarbons are practically flat. It's around $130 billion per year. This is the same amount of cash Russia spends for the war against Ukraine. Yeah. And the reason is very clear, that all these sanctions that have been imposed on the Russian oil and different types of ceilings, they are not efficient. What has been effective? that Russia has been deprived of the primary market of hydrocarbons in the European Union. It is really effective. So what needs to be done? Look, we can do it. We can just sanction all Russian refineries, all those refineries and all the companies that purchased Russian oil. And there is an ability, we have even technical ability to do it via the American banks and European banks. The idea that President Trump launched against, not an idea, an action that President Trump took against India is not the best one. I believe that it's better to cooperate with India and to incentivize them to buy US oil rather than the Russian one. And Americans have a lot of leverage over this. So in terms of sanction and what is needed, we need actually to double check what's really effective and what isn't. So we need a joint body in the European Union and in the United States. And there is no this kind of body, experts and analytical folks who are able to figure out whether it is effective or no, because as of now, Russia is the most sanctioned state in the world. Russia's economy is nosediving, okay? It is nosediving. But they still have resources to prosecute the war. I want to be very clear about that. In terms of Putin's Trump deal, the question you raised about President Trump, look, I will not comment on my beloved President Trump as I am heading to DC.
Yes. Are you having a meeting with him?
Not sure. But it seems that there was a kind of misreading of President Trump of Putin. So he expected that he can easily cut the deal with Putin, just to chat, to talk, and to convince him. That's not the way it works. It is not a trade deal. Putin is not prosecuting any kind of economic war. This is the mission of his life, because Putin lost Ukraine a number of times. In 2004, they lost Ukraine in 1991, when Ukraine declared an independence. Then they lost Ukraine in 2004, when Putin 3 or 4 times, 2 or 3 times, congratulated the pro-Russian President Yanukovych. But in the end, he failed, okay? They lost Ukraine in 2014, and they lost Ukraine in 2022. Yeah. So it is a personal trauma for Putin. I mean, Ukraine is a personal trauma.
And he's very vengeful as a person.
Yeah. He's not a good guy. Yeah. No. So you know, and the thing is that Trump really wanted to get some kind of concessions and to cut the peace deal and to get the Nobel Prize in Anchorage. But what he got instead, Putin played him. Putin actually tried to humiliate him. And that's what was happening. So I hope, fingers crossed, that my beloved President Trump has realized this. And we expect to get some kind of real actions from the White House. Then you asked me about what kind of
not doing.
Regrets?
Not doing.
Not doing. That I didn't run for president.
That's true.
Putin
After the Revolution of Dignity?
Yeah. But Putin, in general terms, look, I had a lot of flaws. Okay, a lot. But on the other hand, well, we did what we can, and I've done what we can. I decreased the budget deficit from 10% to 3%. Okay, could you imagine in the times of war? The same goes.
What was the amount of currency Ukraine had after the Revolution of Dignity?
It is funny. So I like this the kind of job that I got. In the state coffers, when I was sworn in as a prime minister, you know how much cash I had in the state coffers? 10,000 euros. It is an official data. You can check it in the internet. So we've done a lot, but I had to do more. Maybe in the next life or in the next term somewhere, I will try to fix the flaws that I had.
And you can bring Ukraine into European Union.
Well, it's a hard toil, yeah. And answering your question on DCFTA and the EU, so as we are out of as we are pressed for time, here is the thing: we urgently. It was a milestone when we signed DCFTA and visa-free regime with the European Union. This was about our choice to join back, and I want to reiterate, to join back our European family. But what is needed right now? We urgently need to open negotiations on an EU accession. And Trojan horse, Mr. Orban, is a key impediment. He's a close ally of Putin, and I can't figure out what the hell he is doing in the European Union. He has to move to Moscow.
Yeah, maybe joining Eurasian Union. Kier, would you like?
Still have time?
Yeah, we can just for you to wrap up on the deal, because I think that's something people are expecting or falsely expecting.
Well, sadly, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what kind of deal Trump may have been flattered by thinking he was going to get by Putin, because it was a symptom of what was happening. And what was happening was interaction between an individual who is extremely good at manipulating people, backed up by an entire state apparatus that puts immense emphasis and resources into manipulating people, with an individual who gives every impression of being as easy to manipulate as a 5-year-old. So the problem was the mindset within which this was approached, and the result, of course, is that Russia runs rings around the current administration, even if it is not in ideological sympathy with Putin's vision for Europe. Still, it is disinclined to oppose it. But, of course, there are opportunities and advantages there, and we've seen from the behaviors of this administration how it can be turned to European advantage. If we see that Qatar, for example, can get a unilateral guarantee of security from the United States simply by giving a second-hand aeroplane to the president, there is a proposal, one of the best proposals that I've seen for ensuring that US forces continue to be allocated to the defense of Europe, specifically air defense. And I would really like to know who came up with this idea in the first place, but it's a beautiful one. Build a Trump Tower in every single European capital,
That will be defended
and
by
then
US
the
Air
future
Force.
security of Europe will matter to the United States.
Here you go. I think that. So, as you can see, we don't like creativity in Chatham House, as Kier has just proposed one of the perhaps unconventional approach to new security architecture, but worth considering. And I hope our event today has illuminated what that strategy, hopefully combined between Europe and United States, could look like. And we've taken away some of the excuses that you may have for not doing the right thing. So I'd like to thank Arseniy and Kier for their contributions, for you to coming, for people to joining online. And stay tuned with Chatham House and our work on Ukraine. And thank you for all your attention, care, and slava Ukraini.
Thank you.